You know, here on the show, I think I pay attention to science, and I know Keith does, and he mentioned yesterday during his top 5 of 5, they begin...
I mentioned because I was surprised he left it out of his top 5 at 5.
Well, excuse me.
Started removing the fuel rods.
I didn't think girls cared about science or math.
We do, John. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Well, over there in Fukushima, they are beginning to remove those fuel rods from the damaged reactor. Tokyo Electric doesn't seem to have a real handle on it. Is it time for an international effort? Is it time to tell the Japanese, look, we've got to do something? I heard Arnie Gundersen yesterday during an interview say it's like trying to remove cigarettes from a crushed pack. In other words, there's so much damage that if you're going down there and you're getting those spent fuel rods, and you know these guys can only spend a few minutes working because of the radiation. It's like you're trying to pull, very delicately, whole cigarettes out of a crushed pack. And I got the impression that Mr. Gundersen did not think it was going to go very well. We welcome back to AM 560, former nuclear industry executive and chief engineer for Fairwinds Consulting, and he has been watching Fukushima from the beginning of this disaster. Arnie Gundersen is here. Good morning, Arnie. How are you, sir?
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for your time and your expertise. How complicated is this effort to remove these fuel rods, and do you think that Tokyo Electric can get it done?
Well, normally, removing fuel rods is done pretty routinely in power plants around the country. What makes this complicated, though, is that there was a huge earthquake that distorted the fuel racks, and then on top of that, the roof fell in when the building exploded. So no one has ever dealt with those kinds of complications before. There was a Japanese reactor that had an earthquake, and 7 or 8 of the fuel rods got jammed just because of the earthquake. And, of course, Fukushima had an earthquake and the roof fell in. So it's very complicated because once the nuclear fuel bundle has been in the nuclear reactor, it's brittle. And if you pull too hard, you can snap it. Oof. So what Tokyo Electric did just yesterday is they pulled 2 bundles, but they weren't spent fuel. They were new fuel. So they're taking all sorts of credit for pulling 2 bundles.
Those are the easy ones.
Right, they pulled the easy ones. You got it.
Mm-hmm. And then where are they taking them?
Well, they're putting it into a canister that weighs something like 100 tons. And that's the next part of the problem, is they have to lift that canister and then lower it off the roof. And, of course, everybody's concerned if there should be an earthquake while the canister is being moved, it could make a really bad day, because if they drop that canister, it could knock a hole in the bottom of the fuel pool and the water could run out.
Oh, my gosh.
So, yeah,
one nightmare after another.
There are no easy steps in this process. Every one of them is fraught with danger.
Hey, Arnie, how problematic are those racks that you mentioned at the bottom of the cooling pools?
You know, they have to be removed. It's not a question of not moving them, because the building is structurally so weak that you got to move them. But the problem is that the people running it are the same people that let rats eat their wires and have been leaking radioactivity into the Pacific Ocean for 2 years. So I don't have a lot of confidence in Tokyo Electric to do the job right.
Well, not only that, they're the people that left the generators at sea level, and that caused the problem from the get-go.
Yes, and they knew about those problems for 20 years. So we're dealing with somebody with a history with a management culture of just not telling the truth, not treating its people and the people of Japan with any respect. And, I've said repeatedly now, the job has to be done, but let's get somebody in there who's competent and trustworthy. It's time to replace Tokyo Electric.
All right, well, let's talk politics then. Is it time for some sort of international effort? And if so, how do you go tell the Japanese diplomatically or not so diplomatically, like our new version of Douglas MacArthur is moving in for a while and taking over?
I've been approached by 3 American companies who wanted to help, who had technology, and the Japanese rebuffed them every time. So it's not like there are good ideas out there that are available. There are plenty of good ideas out there, but either culturally or just because they don't want to spend the money, they've rebuffed all the American companies I know of. So now they're changing their law so that the American companies won't be liable if something goes wrong. And that should open it up to large companies like General Electric, who are concerned that, if one of their great inventions has a problem and wipes out the nation of Japan, they don't want to be on the hook for the liability.
Arnie Gundersen is joining us. He is an engineer, chief engineer for Fairwinds Consulting. He's talking about Fukushima. But on a larger issue, there's a gentleman who's involved in your industry. I'll leave him nameless for our purposes here. But in talking about Zion, just up the shore from Chicago here, or any of the other number of plants in Illinois, we have more than any other state. But all the way across the nation, with Harry Reid shutting down the mountain in Nevada, now we're going to store these things on site. My friend contends that is actually a better long-term solution to make them secure on site as opposed to moving them, all this spent fuel and the radioactive equipment and gloves and what have you, to one central location. Are you of the same thought process on that?
Yeah, Zion is actually going to start moving nuclear fuel next month in December, just like the Japanese, except that Zion didn't have the roof fall in and didn't have an earthquake. There's something called HOSS, H-O-S-S, and that's not the guy on Bonanza back 30 years ago. It stands for Hardened On-Site Storage. And you can take this fuel and put it in a nuclear, into the canister, and then those canisters can be hardened against terrorists, against airplane impacts. They do this in Europe, but in America, because it costs money and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission doesn't want the utilities to spend that money, we don't have hardened on-site storage.
So where are they going to be taking us?
Well, right now, Zion's going to leave them on site. 10 years from now, the building will be gone and hopefully available for public access, but there'll be a 5-acre piece of land with lights around it and razor wire and all that kind of stuff and a guard force to guard this stuff from terrorists. So it's going to sit there for potentially as long as 60 or 100 years.
Oh, wow. And it's impermeable to a plane crash or anything catastrophic?
Right. It's not terrorist-proof, and it's not plane crash-proof. We should be doing what the Europeans are doing, except it costs too much money for Americans.
Well,
right.
we're busy watching TV, and NFL football season's happening, Arnie, so nobody's paying attention.
Hey, Arnie,
but it's true.
Arnie, before we let you go, based on what we know, is this more or less severe than Chernobyl?
There's a couple different types of radiation. It's certainly worse than Chernobyl with regard to something called noble gases. It's 3 times worse than Chernobyl for noble gases. It's roughly equal to Chernobyl for another thing called iodine, and it may be a little less than Chernobyl for something called cesium. So, there was 3 nuclear reactors that exploded at Fukushima. There was only 1 at Chernobyl.
It's a big buffet table of trouble, and it's going to cost at least $50 billion. That's probably the low mark, and it's going to go on for decades, if not centuries. Arnie, it keeps you in business. It keeps you on the radio. We're glad to have your expertise and your analysis, so we'll call on you again.
All right. Fairwinds is a nonprofit, so we don't really worry about being in business here. But thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. We always appreciate your time. Arnie Gundersen here on AM 560 The Answer. Now, that's a story that probably no other station, no other show will talk about today, but it's important. We all lose track of Fukushima. We must remember that and keep our eyes on it for our own purposes here, selfishly speaking, with Zion just up the road.